I left the apartment at my usual time and pulled out of the parking lot onto the street. I made a U-turn and headed down Cortez to the stop sign at Monte Vista, then took a left. In 20 minutes, I'd be at work. If it were just a regular Friday with no surprises, I'd be able to leave early and head to the lake. The tent and the rest of my gear were in the back of my pickup, and all I had to do was stop and get some ice. I reached over, turned on the radio, and caught the latest George Jones track with the song, The Cold Hard Truth. The song ended, and the DJ said, "No one does it better than OL Possum. And now let's hear from Susan with the traffic and weather." Susan told me there wouldn't be any traffic on my route, and that the weekend would be warm and sunny. After half a dozen commercials for services I'd never use and products I'd never buy, the DJ came back. "Good morning. It's 7:06 on this beautiful Friday, June 9th, and you're listening to KXYZ. Here's Rhonda Vincent, ready to take you for a ride on the Bluegrass Express." It all started with a business trip to Chicago. I kissed my wife, Sherry, goodbye, told her I'd call as soon as I arrived in Chicago, and checked into the hotel. The flight went smoothly, and I took the shuttle bus to the hotel, then called Sherry to let her know where I was. I sat down at the desk in my room, going through the documents I needed to discuss with the client the next day, and around 7, I headed to the hotel restaurant for a bite to eat. After a decent dinner, I wandered into the hotel lobby to listen to some live music and have a drink or two. I was sitting at the bar, sipping a vodka tonic, when a raspy voice whispered in my ear from behind, "Hey there, want to have some fun, sweetheart?" I quickly turned around and saw Annette Carlson. Annette had been my steady girlfriend during the first 2 years of college. Over those 2 years, we had our share of wild times before we eventually parted ways, almost on friendly terms, when she told me she wanted to experience life with other people. Her words still echoed in my mind. "I really like you, Frank, but I was a virgin when we met, and I want to live a little while I'm still young." Before she told me about it, I was actually considering buying a ring and getting down on one knee. The speed with which I abandoned that idea suggested it probably wasn't such a great one to begin with. Later, I found out that she had gained a reputation around campus for being a bit too easy. And now, 15 years later, here she was, standing behind me at a hotel bar in Chicago. She hugged me, pulled me close, and said she was so happy to see me. Then she invited me to join her and her husband at their table. I told her no, thank you. I didn't want to intrude, but she insisted. "Nonsense. Come on," she said, grabbing my hand, pulling me off the bar stool, and leading me to where her husband was waiting. As we walked to their table, she leaned in and whispered, "You don't have to mention how I greeted you. Harry wouldn't get it." "That's too bad. I was seriously considering taking you up on the offer." Of course, that wasn't true. I had never cheated on Sherry and wasn't planning to, but at that moment, it just seemed like the thing to say. Annette introduced me to her husband, and then we both amused ourselves by reminiscing like old friends. "Have you heard from whatever happened to? And did you hear about?" Harry got up to head to the men's room, and Annette watched him as he walked away. Once he was out of sight, she asked, "Why did you even let me go?" She asked. "As far as I remember, I didn't let anything happen. You just straight up told me you wanted to explore the male population at school and said goodbye." Biggest mistake of my life. I already had the best and didn't even know it. Thanks for the compliment. It's true, honey, and you know it. Besides being a great guy, you were the best I've ever had, and I was a fool to let you go. Not exactly the kind of thing to say with your husband in the next room. Harry's a sweetheart, and I'm happy to have him, but let's just say he's not the best in bed. I knew what I was getting when I married him, but that doesn't mean I have to forget the good memories. Harry returned, and the conversation shifted to topics that included him. We sat, talked, and had drinks for about an hour. Then Annie's phone rang, and after a brief greeting, she continued the conversation. "I suppose I'll have to ask Harry. Hey, do you remember Frank Corbett? He's sitting right across from me now. Hold on, let me check." She turned to me. "Do you remember Mary Ellen Fraser?" I nodded. "Well, she's now Mary Ellen Watson. She's having a party, and there might be a few other people there that you know. Want to come?" I didn't have much choice but to agree. Then I mentioned that I needed to head up to my room first, and Annie asked if she could come up and use my bathroom. I'd prefer to dry off with a real towel rather than paper napkins from the ladies' room. As we walked toward the elevators, Annie, who had had a few more drinks than I did, giggled and said, "I hope no one I know sees this." "Sees what?" her husband asked. "That I'm heading up to a hotel room with two men." Her husband replied, "It would probably look even worse than it does now. They'd see your husband leaving you and letting you go up to a room with a stranger. God knows what they'd think." "Why? Where are you going?" "To get the car. I'll meet you at the entrance." He left, and Annie and I got into the elevator. As the doors closed behind us, Annie giggled again and said, "Good thing I love my husband, or I might just carry out my earlier suggestion right here in this elevator. Would you let me, baby? Would you let your ex-girlfriend have a little fun?" Knowing she was just joking, I played along. No doubt about it, I would. Let me be honest. Annie was an incredibly attractive woman, and though I had no intention of doing anything, her appearance and the memory of our past did stir something in me, and she noticed. She reached out, brushed her hand against the growing bulge, and giggled again, saying, "He remembers me. Can I take a peek? Just like old times?" She reached for my zipper. I was just about to push her hand away when we reached my floor and the elevator doors opened. Annie quickly pulled her hand back, but not before the couple waiting for the elevator noticed. The woman looked away, embarrassed, while the man gave me a knowing smile as we stepped out. Annie giggled and said, "Oops." We entered my room, and Annie went to use the bathroom while I pulled a notebook and pen out of my briefcase. I wanted to make sure I had something to write down addresses and phone numbers, just in case Mary Ellen had a lot of familiar faces at the party. Annie came out of the bathroom, and I went in to freshen up. I glanced in the mirror and noticed some stubble. Grabbing my electric razor, I quickly tidied up, then stepped out, collected Annie, and we headed downstairs. Harry was waiting for us at the entrance, and we drove to a house in the south part of Chicago. Besides Mary Ellen, I recognized about half a dozen people from my college days. It was a really enjoyable evening, and in my opinion, it ended far too soon. I made sure to tell a few people that I wanted to stay in touch and jotted down their numbers and addresses in my notebook. Harry and Annie drove me back to the hotel, and I called it a night. The next day went smoothly, and I called Sherry to let her know I'd be home by 8. She responded in a husky voice, "Then I'll be waiting for you in our bedroom at 8 sharp, and you'd better be ready for a warm welcome." The thought of the evening ahead had me feeling more than a little eager by the time I walked into the house at 7:56. I dropped my suitcase and briefcase in the living room and headed straight for our bedroom. As I opened the door, I saw Sherry lying on the bed, dressed in a garter belt, high heels, and nylon stockings, just as several pairs of hands grabbed me. I was caught off guard as 4 men pinned me to a chair before I could even put up a fight. When I started yelling and struggling, they shoved a pair of socks in my mouth and tied me to the chair with a rope they had on hand. Sherry got up from the bed and walked toward me. "How do I look, honey? Do I look good in your favorite outfit? The heels are the ones you like so much." She turned and walked back to the bed, where 4 men, including one I recognized from her workplace, were sitting. She knelt in front of the man on the left, glanced at me, and gave a small smile before moving closer. Up until that moment, I had been trying to break free, but as I watched her, all my energy drained away. Sherry continued down the line, looking at me before engaging with each of them briefly. Afterward, she got back on the bed and began interacting with them again. Once they were done, the men left for a break, heading to the kitchen. When they returned, Sherry resumed, focusing on 2 at a time while the others watched and touched her. It was intense, and I felt completely powerless. It wasn't slow or gentle, and Sherry made no attempt to hide her enjoyment. After a second break, they returned once more. Sherry removed her outfit but kept her heels on. She looked at me and said, "Thanks for this. I'm having a lot more fun than I expected, and it's all because of you. I don't know if you enjoyed your time with that woman at the hotel as much as I am here, but thanks for this opportunity." She turned back to her group, and as I watched her walk away, I was completely confused. I gave her this opportunity? Then it hit me, the woman in your hotel room last night. Somehow, She found out about Annie and completely misunderstood the situation. I was being punished for something I never even did, and Sherry would never know, because after what she had just done, I doubted I would ever speak to her again. As she climbed back onto the bed, Sherry turned to the group and said with a playful smile, "I want to try something I've read about." The men exchanged grins as they all got into position. Sherry moved gracefully between them, engaging in a moment that was intense but not drawn out in detail. The room was filled with quiet laughter and whispers as they continued, the atmosphere charged with energy. Sherry seemed to be enjoying herself, and the men followed her lead. After some time, the moment came to a close, and the men got dressed and left, leaving the room in silence. "Just a little longer, baby," she said as the last of them walked out the door. "I need to freshen up, and then we can talk." She went to the bathroom, and I heard the shower turn on. It was almost half an hour before she came back into the room, still naked. She had brushed her hair, reapplied her makeup, and then grabbed a robe from the closet, slipping it on. She walked over to me, pulled the socks out of my mouth, and as she started to untie the ropes that had kept me tied to the chair, she said, "What you just saw, baby, is what I'll do every time you cheat on me." And I said, "Almost, hope you cheat often." It was amazing. I could really get used to it if I let myself. The ropes fell, and I tried to stand, but the hours spent tied up so tightly had taken their toll. I wobbled and nearly collapsed, having to grab the chair to keep from falling to the floor. Sherry said, "Come here, sit on the bed, and let's talk." I ignored her and stumbled toward the bathroom, but I didn't make it before I fell to the ground. Sherry came over to help, but I snarled at her to stay away from me. I managed to get up, use the bathroom, splash my face with cold water, and dry off. Feeling a little steadier, I left the bathroom, walked through the bedroom toward the stairs, and started down. Sherry followed closely behind me. "Where are you going?" "We need to talk, Rob. We need to clear some things up." I ignored her and walked over to where I had left my suitcase and briefcase when I came home, grabbed them, and walked out of the house. Sherry stood in the doorway, calling after me, "Where are you going, Rob? This isn't going to solve anything. Come back. We need to talk." She was still shouting as I backed out of the driveway, turned right onto the street, and drove away. I found a motel near my workplace, checked in, set a wake-up call for 6 in the morning, and collapsed into a restless sleep. When the wake-up call from the front desk came, I got up, took a shower, and headed to the village inn for breakfast. While eating, I mentally made a list of the things I needed to take care of that morning. At 8, I called my boss and told him I was back in town but had some personal matters to handle and that I'd be in around noon. By 9, I had emptied our bank accounts and taken everything of value from the safety deposit box. I walked down the street to another bank, opened new accounts, and rented a new safety deposit box. By 10, I had canceled all our joint credit cards, keeping only my American Express and one Visa card that was solely in my name. I called Sherry's office and asked to speak with her. As soon as she said hello, and I confirmed she was at work, I hung up and drove home. By 11, I had everything I needed to get by for the next couple of weeks. When I arrived at work, the secretary handed me a stack of message slips, 2/3 of which were from Sherry. I sorted them out from the pile and tossed them into the trash bin next to Carol's desk. Then I told Carol that Sherry and I had separated and asked her not to take any more messages from her or put her calls through to me. I went into Ben's office and gave him a rundown of my meetings in Chicago. Then I mentioned that I might need to take some unplanned time off. I explained that Sherry and I had separated, and I'd need some time to find an apartment and move. He asked if I could delay the time off for a couple of days. "I need you to head to Atlanta and handle a situation there. You'll probably be gone for 4 or 5 days." I told him, no problem, and it really wasn't. It would give me a chance to get out of town and avoid whatever Sherry might try to do. I'd bet that by the time I left Ben's office, Sherry wouldn't be able to use any of the credit cards. She wouldn't be able to reach me either, so she'd probably try to come to the office, but by then, I'd be in the air, on my way to Atlanta. I informed Ben and Carol not to tell Sherry that I'd left town, then headed back to the motel, packed my things, and went to the airport. While waiting for my flight to be announced, I picked up one of the free housing magazines and started browsing through it, making a list of places to check out when I returned to the city. About halfway to Atlanta, it dawned on me that I had forgotten something important. I used the in-flight phone to call Ben and asked him to stop my direct deposit and hold my paycheck for me until I got back and could transfer it to my new bank. While I was on the phone with him, he mentioned that Sherry had called. When she couldn't reach me, she insisted that Carol connect her with Ben. She tried to persuade Ben to make me answer her calls, but he told her that I had informed him we had separated. He then told her that communication between her and me wasn't the company's concern and that he wasn't going to get involved. After that, he hung up on her. Once I arrived in Atlanta, I checked into a hotel and got a good night's sleep. The next day was spent putting out fires at the Atlanta office, and when I returned to the hotel, I called my parents, my brother George, and my sister Mary. I told them about my separation from Sherry. I didn't go into too much detail, simply saying that I had returned home from a business trip early and discovered something I didn't like. My mom mentioned that Sherry had called, asking her to tell me to return her call. Naturally, I didn't. The next morning at 9, I called Ben to give him an update, and he surprised me. He told me he had seen Sherry the previous evening. I guess since she couldn't get through to you, she decided to wait for you in the parking lot until you finished work, he said. How's Atlanta treating you? He asked. I've only been here a few times, but I think it's a nice place. Is your separation from Sherry temporary while you try to work things out, or is this headed for a divorce? There's no chance of us getting back together. How would you feel about relocating? What do you mean? This is the third time I've had to send someone to Atlanta to sort things out. I'm planning on letting Falstaff go. Would you like to take over the Atlanta office? Hell yes. I'd love that. Good. Then it's settled. We'll work out the details when you get back. That boosted my spirits, and as I sat there smiling, it occurred to me that moving to Atlanta would save me from having to avoid Sherry, which was going to be tricky. If she was willing to sit in parking lots waiting for me, who knows what else she might try. I wasn't afraid of facing her, but I simply didn't want to. From the way she spoke while untying me, it was clear that her attitude was, okay, now we're even, and we can move on. But that was never going to happen. If she had gone off and slept with some guy in a motel and then come back home saying, all right, now we're even, our marriage would still be over. But for her to do what she did with 4 men and expect me to accept it? No way. Not in a million years. The only thing a face-to-face meeting with her would accomplish is that I'd probably end up spitting in her face. I understood why she did it, and I hated it. She didn't trust me enough to talk to me first? She just assumed the worst? Screw her. No, it was better to just walk away. I wasn't going to file for divorce. I was just going to leave. I wrapped up my work in Atlanta and headed back home. After leaving the airport, I checked into a hotel near my workplace, then went to the office to update Ben. We discussed the logistics of my move to the Atlanta office and outlined a timeline for when it would happen. Then, I took a couple of days off to handle some personal matters. I parked further down the street from the house after Sherry left for work. As soon as she turned the corner, I dialed a number on my cell phone and said we were ready to go. A few minutes later, a rented Ryder truck pulled up to the driveway with my brother George behind the wheel. Right behind him, a car arrived and parked, and out came Skip and Corey, 2 of my closest friends. They joined George and me. Within 2 hours, I had everything I wanted packed up. I took all my personal belongings, the home desktop computer, printer, and enough furniture to set up in an apartment in Atlanta. I reached out to a lawyer to draft a power of attorney for my brother, and then I put a copy of it in an envelope along with a note that said, "Call George when you're ready to sell the house. He'll handle it for me." I didn't bother to sign it and mailed it off. She would receive it in about 2 days, and by that time, I'd be well on my way to Atlanta. I wasn't concerned about the house. We had refinanced it to build the swimming pool and tennis court, and I doubted there would be any equity left once the selling costs were deducted from the proceeds. I had one more stop to make, so I told the man what I needed, handed him some cash, and then drove to where I had rented the truck. They attached a trailer for towing my car. I headed to George's place, loaded my car onto the trailer, and within half an hour, I was on my way to Atlanta. I called Ben to let him know I had arrived in Atlanta, and he set his plan in motion. That same night, He flew to Atlanta, and the next morning, he went to the office, fired fall staff, and sent all the employees home for the day, assuring them that their pay wouldn't be affected and they could return to work the following morning. I spent the day apartment hunting and settled on one by the time I met Ben for dinner. Over dinner, he told me that Sherry had been showing up in the parking lot almost every day, sometimes even twice a day, once in the morning, trying to catch me coming back to work, and again in the evening, hoping to intercept me as I left. One time, she even stopped Carol and offered her $100 to sneak her past the security guard in the lobby and up to your office. Seems like she still doesn't know you're gone. The next morning, we were at the office to greet the staff when they arrived for work. Ben brought everyone up to speed, wished me luck, and then headed to the airport. The next week and a half were spent moving into my new apartment, getting my new office in order, and getting to know the employees while they got to know me. On the last Friday of the second week, I received a package in the mail and set it aside to go through over the weekend. My apartment was on the second floor, and it had a small balcony overlooking the pool. I had bought a small patio table and 2 chairs to use out there. On Saturday morning, I sat at the table, sipping coffee and going through the contents of the package. It had cost me quite a bit, but I felt it was worth it, based on the assumption that Sherry had enlisted Steve, a colleague of mine whom I recognized, to help organize the group incident, and that they had arranged it all in one day. I was sure he'd use some of his buddies to fill out the group. I had given the private investigator all the information I had on Steve and provided descriptions of the other 3 men who had been there that night. I told the detective I wanted him to follow Steve and find out if he was meeting with anyone who matched those descriptions, and if so, to gather information on them. The results were much better than I'd expected. Steve had indeed met with 3 men who matched the descriptions I'd given the detective, and sheer luck confirmed that these 3 were exactly the ones I'd been looking for. The operative who was tailing Steve saw him meet up with the trio at a sports bar and managed to take a seat nearby. He overheard them talking about the group incident and discussing when they could do it again. He didn't catch if they had set a date because he got up to call for backup and follow the trio as they left the bar. It was incredibly expensive, but now I had the names, addresses, and workplaces of all 4 of those guys. I started making plans. It took 3 months before I could arrange a weekend trip. I drove. No one tracks cars like they do planes, and I had extra gas in cans so I wouldn't have to stop at any gas stations. By the time I went to work on Monday morning, I was filled with the satisfaction of knowing it would be a very long time before Steve Bowen could use his equipment again. A cast iron pipe applied multiple times to the groin area tends to have a damaging effect on male organs. Apparently, a hooded man caught Bowen in the parking lot outside his home and beat him within an inch of his life, taking his watch, rings, wallet, and everything else in his pockets. 3 weeks later, the same thing happened to Archie Mellon and Jeff Montrose. By the time I made my 3rd trip, Norm Reed seemed to have figured out what connected Bowen, Mellon, and Montrose and took a job in another state, hightailing it out of Dodge. It was a shame, but 3 out of 4 wasn't bad. I considered hiring the private detective to track him down but decided against it. 5 months passed, and work was going well. I met a few ladies in bikinis lounging by the pool and got particularly close to one of them. One of those women, a flight attendant named Brandy, eventually found her way into my bed. Whenever she wasn't flying or visiting her parents, she spent time with me. It was a good arrangement for both of us until she told me she was getting married to one of the captains she regularly flew with. I suspect that when she wasn't in my bed, she was in his during their layovers. As a parting gift, she introduced me to another flight attendant named Gloria, and we hit it off. Gloria made it clear from the start that she was only interested in a friends with benefits arrangement, which suited me just fine. I felt down for a couple of days after losing Brandy and before starting things with Gloria, but then things got worse. One Tuesday evening, I came home from work, pulled into the parking lot, and as I got out of the car, I heard, "Hello, Rob." I turned around and saw Sherry. I just stood there staring at her. Surprised to see me? More disappointed than surprised. Disappointed? I was hoping I'd never see you again. The way I left should have made that clear. Maybe it would have if you had filed for divorce. The fact that you didn't gave me hope that we could work things out and continue our life together. There's no chance of that. Your group incident put an end to that. How can you blame me for that after what you did? I don't even know what you think I did. That's bull, Rob. I told you I wanted to get back at you after I called and found that tramp in your room. There was no tramp in my room, Sherry. Don't feed me lies. I called you, and a woman answered the phone. I asked who she was, and she told me, then asked who I was. When I said I was your wife, she giggled and said, "Oh, so you're the lucky one who gets that amazing guy all the time." And then she hung up. So, instead of talking to me about it, you went and did something foolish, had a group incident to teach me a lesson? Is that all? Exactly, she exclaimed. First of all, Annie wasn't a tramp. She and her husband were waiting for me to use the bathroom in my room before they took me to a party with people I went to school with. Annie had a bit too much to drink, and she was probably just being playful when you called. Stop it, Rob. She straight up told me she knew about the size of your, you know? She did know. Annie was my girlfriend for the first 2 years of college, and then we broke up. And again, she was with her husband. You could have found all of this out if you'd bothered to talk to me before you went and destroyed our marriage. As for the divorce, it was in my best interest not to file and let you do it. How do you figure that? I would have had to split our assets evenly if I filed for divorce before I left. You'll still have to do that, even if I'm the one to file. Maybe, but the assets we would have had to split would have been those we jointly owned at the time of filing. Right now, that's just the house, and there's not enough equity in it to even bother. If you're waiting for me to file for divorce, you'll be waiting a long time. As long as we're married, there's always a chance. No, Sherry, there's not a chance in the world. You showed me exactly what you think of me when you did what you did out of spite. You showed me you don't trust me, and you showed me that you think I'm some spineless weakling who would just accept what you did and say, "Sorry, I'll be a good boy from now on." You killed our marriage, and there's no way it can be revived. You're wrong. I don't think you're spineless. I expected you to be as upset as I was when that woman answered your phone. I know you're not weak. That's why I had them tie you to the chair, to keep you in control. I love you, Rob. I love you. I want you. And I need you. Well, that's too damn bad, Sherry, because I don't want you. Especially after I was tied to that damn chair and had to watch you for hours. You know what struck me the most while I was sitting there? The ease with which you did it and how quickly you arranged everything. It was like it was something you'd done many times before. You seemed so comfortable with those 4 guys. It looked like you were in sync, like you all shared in the pleasure. Her face went pale. Oh no, Rob, never. I swear to God, never before. Unfortunately, Sherry, I don't trust you anymore, so I don't believe that. But it doesn't matter. Once was enough. Look at it this way. You said it was amazing and that you could get used to it. So go ahead, call up your 4 guys and get started. I couldn't do it, even if I wanted to. Why not? I'm certainly not going to stop you. You know why. You know what you did, and even if they can't prove it, they know it was you. Sorry, Sherry. I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm not stupid, Rob. When 3 of the 4 ended up in the ER, and the only thing they had in common was that night with me, it wasn't hard to figure out who was responsible. Only 3? Why not all 4? Because Norm figured it out too and left town before you could get to him. Any idea where he went? Why do you want to know? Just curious. You're not a very good liar, Rob. So those 4 are out of the picture. So what? You found them pretty quickly. It shouldn't be hard to find more. I don't want any other guys. I want you. I've put the house up for sale, and as soon as it's sold, I'm moving here to Atlanta. Why the hell would you do that? It'd be closer to you. Anyway, we won't be able to work things out if we're 1,000 kilometers apart. Didn't you hear what I just said? We're not getting back together. You being here and me seeing you from time to time is only going to remind me of you and your 4 buddies. I'm trying to forget those memories, not reinforce them. Say what you want, but I'm going to win you back. It may take time, and it might not be easy, but I'm going to do it. Screw you, I said, turning away from her and heading into my apartment. I never did ask how she found me. She must have hired a private investigator. I wondered why I hadn't heard the phone when she called. It must have happened while I was using my electric razor. She sold the house and moved to Atlanta. Somehow, she managed to get an apartment in the same complex where I lived. Thankfully, it wasn't in the same building, but still close enough for her to keep an eye on me. It seemed like every evening when I got home from work, there was a note slipped under my door, saying she was making one of my favorite dishes and inviting me to dinner. Notes inviting me to go out with her to this or that place, or to meet for a drink after work. I ignored them all, but what I found last night made me pause. It read, "We both love sex, but I haven't had any since, well, you know when. How about a friends with benefits arrangement? Or forget the friends and go with neighbors with benefits. What do you think?" I thought about it most of the night and part of the morning. Sherry was damn good in bed and, suddenly, I realized what I was considering, shook my head to clear my thoughts, and muttered, "Hell no." I made a mental note to call Gloria when she got back from her flight, then turned the radio back on and listened to Toby Keith sing about how much he loves the bar. Thank you for listening until the end.